Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of Good Neighbor Politics. My name is Jason Elam, and I'm really excited to have you back joining us again this week for another episode. A lot is going on in the world, so we've got a ton of things to talk about happening here in the U.S. this week. The government has been officially shut down for 13 days. You really can't tell from the externals. There's not a lot that is different in our day-to-day lives. Thankfully, they have worked it out for our military folks to get paid, and so that's a plus. Social Security checks are still going out, but that doesn't mean that all is going smoothly. Obviously, folks want the government reopened. There are government workers on furlough who Trump is threatening to fire, and there's a lot going on. In the middle of all this, we have the No King's Day protests coming up again this Saturday. A lot of people are thinking that this could be the biggest political protest in the history of the United States. There are events planned for all around the country. You can find it. Just Google No King's Day protests, and you'll find the website, and you'll be able to find an event near you if you'd like to participate. Trump is very much coming out against these protests, obviously, because he's the king that they're protesting against. But that is what I want to talk to you about this week. He and his staff have decided that this event is actually a Hate America rally, and that the people who are marching are paid protesters who are being paid by, I don't know, George Soros or Antifa or someone else. That they like to blame for everything when they feel like an event doesn't put them in a nice light. And you can imagine, if this is the largest political protest in the history of our country, which it may very well be, I don't know. We'll see on Saturday. But if it is anywhere near what they're expecting, then it's going to put him in a very negative light. Tens of thousands, maybe even millions of people showing up, taking to the streets to voice their displeasure. But there's a real problem when a government authority figure, such as the President of the United States, decides that protesting him is the same thing as hating America. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said earlier today that no kings means no paychecks, and that's not good. It's a problem when the government decides that criticizing the government is the same thing as hating America. That is a real problem. That's a real issue. When they are so conflating their administration with standing with America or loving our country, we've got a real problem. So were the folks who were upset with Barack Obama while he was in office, were those folks hating America by speaking out? Of course not. And the Republicans, MAGA, would not have said that they hated America because they were criticizing the president. They would just say we had a terrible president during that time. Well, many of us feel like we have a much worse president right now. And it's not hating America to take to the streets to voice your displeasure. It's what we have. Sometimes it feels like the courts are moving so slowly. The 2026 election is not until next year. This is our opportunity to voice our displeasure. And so, of course, Trump and his followers, his MAGA people in Congress and the White House staff, they're all coming out against this rally as a Hate America rally because they cannot stand the thought that anybody who loves America would criticize them or disagree with them in any way. It's all a great big distraction. There's a lot of distractions happening right now. Trump said on Air Force One today that he doesn't know that he will go to heaven. He said, I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't think I'm going to be able to go to heaven. And somebody had asked him, a reporter had asked him if, brokering peace between Israel and Palestine, which he was not solely responsible for, and it took way too long. But if that would help him in his case of getting to heaven. And he said, I don't think I'm going to go to heaven. I don't think I'm going to be able to make that. But maybe I'm in heaven right now on Air Force One, he said, kind of playing it off like a joke. Most people I know, even folks that we might say are ethically challenged, morally challenged, most people, if you ask them seriously, do you think you're going to heaven when you die? Unless they just don't believe in heaven, the vast majority would say yes. So my question is this: what in the world has this man done that he doesn't think he's going to heaven when he dies, since so many people who have very poor ethics or morals all think they're going to heaven because they're a victim and, well, God will understand my situation and let me in. So that's a really interesting question that came up in that press gaggle on Air Force One today. There's a lot of other things happening, though, that are starting to really concern me. The left and the right, politically, don't get together very often. But when they do, it's usually a huge red flag. And we're starting to see that. Democratic socialists have been making real gains in America. Zohran Mamdani in New York is probably going to be the next mayor of New York. Now, I say probably. He's way ahead in the polls, politically speaking. Usually, the Democratic nominee is the winner heading into that election. You know it before the election ever happens. Now, I say probably this time because there have been forces at work behind the scenes for months trying to get everybody but Cuomo to drop out of the race so that it's a one-on-one race with Cuomo and Mamdani. Now, if you look at Mamdani's polling, he's, in the 40s. Cuomo's in the 30s. Curtis Sliwa, who is the Republican candidate, he's only polling about 13% of the vote. They've already gotten Eric Adams to drop out, the current mayor, who was a Democrat, but made a deal with Trump to get out of some corruption charges, and so now he's basically been rejected by the party that elected him. He's already dropped out of the race, hasn't endorsed anybody yet, may yet still do that. He may come out. It will not surprise me at all if he comes out for Cuomo before the end, because establishment Democrats and Republicans are absolutely united in their desire to see Democratic socialists defeated. So much so that during a cabinet meeting this week, a White House staffer, when talking about Antifa and the folks that they were going to go after for being anti-America and being a domestic terrorist organization, which is not a thing, they were talking about the Democratic Socialists of America. The Democratic Socialists of America are going to be the new public enemy number one. And so we see in New York, the threat that Mamdani is raising is he wants to freeze rents, he wants to make city buses free, he wants to provide child care, make the schools better than they've ever been. He's got a really ambitious agenda, most of which he may honestly not have much of a shot of getting passed. But he's probably going to win that race unless they can get, Sliwa, who has said he's not going anywhere and is willing to call out the billionaires who are offering him millions of dollars to drop out of the race so that Cuomo can become the mayor of New York and be more business friendly, right? Mamdani is seen as somebody who's not going to be very business leader friendly, somebody who's really in it for the people. And that scares both the right wing and the left wing to death. Absolutely. What they really don't want is somebody who's going to come in and put the people first and tell the business leaders, you're going to have to pay a livable wage. You're going to have to provide real benefits to full-time employees. You're going to have to give paid family leave. When they go in and tell the folks who are responsible for education, you're going to have to give people a fair shot. To business leaders, to banking leaders, to the banking industry, you're not going to be able to exploit people anymore. They don't want people like that in power. And so you'll see the right and the left come together to sink someone like a Zohran Mamdani. And we're already seeing it, right? It is starting to work in some measured doses right now. Trump's been calling Mamdani a communist. And so Every interview that he does, he's having to answer the question, are you a communist? Which, of course, he's not. But so many in MAGA don't know the difference between a communist and a socialist. They don't understand the difference, and so they just lump them all into one big tribe. And that's not right. It's not fair, but it is what it is. And so Zohrab Mamdani is seeing that happen in his campaign, but that's not the only place it's happening, right? We've also got, you've got AOC, who may very well make a challenge against Chuck Schumer in the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate. That would be interesting. As someone who really represents the people and is willing to take a stand against business interests in pursuit of common good politics. We're seeing Graham Plattner up in Maine. He was really running good guns. He was doing amazing in the campaign. He was blowing through the competition every time he made a speech, every time he showed up at a dinner, every time he released a new ad. It was going viral. He was doing amazing in the polling. And so what did establishment Democrats do in order to counter this Democratic socialist that was about to win their nomination and probably defeat Susan Collins for the U.S. Senate seat in Maine? What'd they do? They went out and recruited the popular governor of Maine to run in the Democratic primary, hoping that she, the sitting governor, will be able to defeat him and keep a Democratic socialist from being the nominee of the party in Maine in 2026. Now, here's the thing. It is a really interesting choice that they're making for Governor Mills to jump into that race, because there's a chance she could lose, and then she would be the sitting governor of the state, having lost a primary of her own party, and that's going to very possibly render her a lame duck in office for the remainder of her term. Now, I don't understand why everyone on the right and the left is so threatened by the Democratic Socialists, but they certainly are becoming very quickly public enemy number one. The Democratic Socialists were named specifically as people who they think in the Trump White House are funding the No Kings movement and the opposition to Trump. They've been saying Antifa. Antifa is not a real organization. There might have been a few people, back during the white supremacy marches days that were rallying, counter protesters who were calling themselves Antifa. But that's not like a national organization. They don't have funding. They don't have offices. They don't have staff. It's not like that. That's not who Antifa is. Also, if you're going to start calling out your enemies, why would you call the anti-fascists as your enemies unless you want to be an authoritarian? And so now they're kind of moving on from Antifa slightly because people aren't taking that very seriously. And now they're saying the Democratic Socialists of America are the real enemy, the real danger. They're the domestic terrorists of the United States. Well, it's the same old playbook. And we've seen this movie before, right? 2016. Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, running as a Democratic Socialist, won the Democratic primary. He did. He got more delegates than Hillary Clinton did. But the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, had rigged a system with super delegates, as they were called, that stole the nomination from Bernie. And of course, a lot of Bernie supporters stayed home, and that led to Hillary losing against Trump, because a lot of Bernie's supporters ended up voting for Trump to try to screw over Hillary, who they felt like screwed out their guy, Bernie Sanders. It was much bigger than Hillary. It was the Democratic National Committee. It was those super delegates and party leaders who were given more vote and more say than primary and caucus voters in the primary itself. And so that is a real problem. But we see the right and the left conspiring to keep these people down. Now, I want to ask you a question. How different would America be today if Bernie Sanders had won the Democratic nomination in 2016? I believe with all my heart that Bernie Sanders would have been elected president in 2016, because a lot of MAGA folks also are Bernie fans. I know it doesn't make sense, But there's a populism that those two forces share. There's a base of populist thought that is shared between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. Now, when you look at their actual policies, they're not similar at all. Bernie Sanders wants Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders wants homes for all. He wants paid family leave for all. He wants tuition-free childcare and higher education for all. He really was running as a democratic socialist, trying to say it's time to change the way we run this country and believe that government can be a force for good in doing some really productive things and changing the way things work. Of course, Donald Trump, he's been in power now twice, hasn't changed anything for the better for the common good. I believe about 10 years ago, he was going to announce his health plan 2 weeks. You notice with Trump a lot, you're going to hear that phrase 2 or 3 weeks, the next couple of weeks, the next few days, and then it never happens. That is an acceptable period of time in most people's ears. Okay, well, I'll keep waiting for a couple of weeks until he does that. Well, he just keeps kicking the can down that road. And so here we are 10 years later. He still doesn't have a health plan. And the government shutdown right now is a result of that, right? Because in the big, beautiful bill, which I think is the big, ugly bill, they took away some of those health care subsidies. They allowed them to sunset or expire. And those are the things that are used to provide health care to a great number of people. Millions of people here in the United States get those subsidies to help them pay for health care through healthcare.gov and through the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And we all know that drives Trump absolutely crazy, but he can't put forth a plan of his own. Trump, before he ran for president, was for universal health care. He talked about having a plan where he was going to make sure every American was covered. It was going to be better than Obamacare. Now, you remember the whole reason that Republicans started hating the Clintons in the first place, especially Hillary, was when her husband was president, she was in charge of implementing universal health care, this new health care plan. And obviously that didn't happen. That was defeated by a Republican Congress. They knew they weren't going to get that, and so they backed off. The Affordable Care Act, as President Obama told podcaster Mark Maron this week, that was the compromise that took place during the Obama administration. He wanted Medicare for all, but knew he could never get that through Congress because healthcare interests, business interests had bought and paid for Congress, and they were never going to go along with that. But that's ultimately what we're going to need in America is something like a Medicare for all, in which we get rid of the lunacy that eyes and teeth are not part of health care, add those to the Medicare program, and then make everyone eligible for it if they want it. You would still have the option for private health care insurance if that's what you want. You could still purchase that on the open market. You could still go to Blue Cross and Blue Shield or Anthem or Horizon and or Cigna and buy your health care, or you could still use the health care that comes from your job. But what Obama wanted to do was at least give everybody the opportunity to choose to be a part of Medicare, and that would be a real game changer in this country. It's really what we need to happen. But the interests are actively working to stop it. We see it in Maine with Graham Plattner. We see it every time AOC makes a speech or has another viral video. We saw it with Bernie Sanders, and now, of course, we're seeing it with Zohran Mamdani in New York. There are others across the country that are being fueled by this movement of people who just say, enough is enough. I'm tired of the government only representing business interests and the people who sponsor their campaigns with money. I need a government that actually works for the people, who's not trying to balance out their allegiance between everyday workers and business interests. We need a government that works for everyone. And of course, business leaders are obviously humans. They are people. The common good includes them. but it doesn't necessarily include corporate interests. We need somebody who's in office who's going to make a difference for the environment, who's going to make a difference in our healthcare system. It's not just broken, it's rigged. We talked a couple of weeks ago about United Healthcare using AI to reject claims and reaching a high rate of like 35% of claims being rejected. That's insane. Why would anybody think that government can't do better than that? Of course it can. Why are we paying the highest healthcare per capita of anybody in the industrialized world? Why are we paying more for prescription drugs than anywhere else in the world? It's because business interests have bought our government leaders, and the government lets them get away with it. Sometimes the government even lets those interests write the laws themselves that they later will pass for the people who fund their campaigns. The government is broken. We need to start over. We need to elect some people who are not in it for business interests, but are actually in it for the American people. Trump's not in it for the American people. Look at his own personal wealth since he took office in January. Y'all, it's only been 10 months since he regained power after inciting an insurrection when he lost the 2020 election, and he did lose the 2020 election. Any reasonable person has to know that at this point. They lost every time they went in front of a judge because they could not offer any evidence of a rigged or stolen election. And so it's so important now that we all see Trump promised to bring down prices on day one. He, of course, did not do that. He hasn't kept that promise. The price of eggs didn't come down. The price of gas hasn't come down. Somebody had commented recently on one of our social media feeds about, they live in Florida and the prices there are definitely lower than they were when Biden was president. Well, there's only one problem with that. I live in Florida too. And I know that's not true. These are people who get on, sometimes they're people, sometimes they're just bots. And they just respond to these comments and they make ridiculous arguments that are not real. Prices haven't come down. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying prices have not come down. And one of the big reasons we're still dealing with high prices are the tariffs that Trump has enacted. He instituted more tariffs again this week. He's killing our farmers, who he swore he would never do anything to hurt. And so it's insane. Crazy, crazy times that we're living in. I encourage you, if you can make it to a No Kings protest this week, go out. Let your voice be heard. Make a sign that says, I love America. I'm here protesting Trump. Let your voice be heard. Add your name to that number who says, no, this is unacceptable. The government we have needs to work for the people, not making themselves and their billionaire friends richer. We're literally having meetings at the White House where the billionaires will gather and talk about how they can fleece the American public to make even more money, be it through crypto, through AI, by rigging the tariffs in their own favor. Right now, they're crashing the dollar. Look at the value of the dollar and how it's dropped. It's insane what is taking place right now in the United States of America. But it's happening because the right and the left are really in this together. Institutional Republican, establishment Republicans, MAGA Republicans are united for the business interests. They're here to make corporate America rich, and they think that the stock market is what is the ultimate sign of a healthy economy. You and I both know that's not true. The stock market can be doing great, and you can't afford your health care. You can't afford to feed your family. You can't afford to only have one job. You can't afford to buy a house. The current generation, my kids' generation, is coming to age in a time in which they will not have, for the first time ever, a better standard of life than their parents because the economy is rigged against them. It's not because of avocado toast or $5 lattes. It's because the economy is rigged against them in favor of the billionaire class. The top 1% in America, the top 1% wealthiest people in America have more wealth combined than the bottom 50% of American workers or American people. Y'all, that's unacceptable. And so we've got to do something about it. We've got to stop empowering MAGA and establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats that are doing things to try to sink people like Graham Plotner, Bernie Sanders, Zohran Mamdani, people who are seriously out there saying the system is rigged and we have to change it. Here's the thing. We know now from Trump 2.0, they are not serious about changing this system. They'll use your anger against the system to make the billionaire class even richer. I like James Tallarico in Texas. He is the son of a preacher, grandson of a preacher. He is a seminarian himself. He was planning to be a minister, but he answered the call to public service. He's in the Texas legislature right now. Now he's running for U.S. Senate in Texas as a Democrat. I'd love to see him win. I think he actually seems to get it, that this isn't right versus left. It's top versus bottom. It's the billionaire class trying to keep all of us as serfs, trying to keep us as indentured servants to keep their economy going while their billions turn into trillions and we get poorer and they get richer. And the only way that's going to happen, actually happen, is if we stop empowering establishment Republicans and MAGA and establishment Democrats and start really pouring our heart and soul into real people running for office who do not have corporate interests at heart. We're going to have to find some people who are not going to be moved by the millions of dollars that get thrown at them in campaign funding, in re-election promises, in order to support government and corporate interests and business interests and billionaire interests. We need some folks who are going to say no to those things. Somebody like a Graham Plotner, somebody like a Zohran Mamdani, somebody like AOC or Bernie Sanders, so many others across the country. We're seeing troops in our streets. They are zip tying naked families that they drug out of bed, zip tying them behind a tree, sometimes disappearing people who are saying, I'm an American citizen, you can't do this to me. And they don't care. They're wearing masks. They're not showing their face. They know there will be no consequences because they're doing what the President of the United States told them to do. Now, personally, I believe a lot of those ICE agents, I believe Secretary Noem, I believe Stephen Miller, so many others, I think will ultimately go to prison for this because while the president himself has immunity, they don't. And they think, well, Trump will pardon me and I won't have to pay any consequences for this. But remember, they're violating some state laws too. And Trump can't pardon them from a state crime. And so somebody like J.B. Pritzker is watching ICE very carefully in Illinois and the National Guard that's been deployed there. And if they violate the law, they're going to get charged with state crimes that Trump can't get them out of. But it's going to take all of us coming together for things like No King's Day and coming together in the 2026 election and saying, we are going to put an end to this. We're not going to fall for this anymore. We know that MAGA doesn't have America's interests at heart. Why are they giving? All right, after the 2016 election, Donald Trump said that Qatar was funding terrorism. What changed between him saying that they were a major funder of terrorism and now is saying we're going to let them have a military facility in Idaho? What? We're going to let Qatar build a military facility on one of our military bases? Why would we possibly allow that? Who thinks that's a good idea besides Donald Trump? And what changed his mind? Well, you'll recall, Qatar is the country that gave him a $400 million jet. It could end up costing us $1 billion to retrofit it. But he got on this plane and thought it was just glorious, and they gave it to him. And now all of a sudden, they can have a military base right on the middle of one of our military bases. Nobody thinks this is a good idea except Donald Trump and his sycophants. So we're going to have to say enough is enough. We have to render him powerless with the 2026 election. He's going to still be doing things that are breaking the law. But we need a Congress that's going to at least try to hold him in check. Right now, The MAGA folks in the House of Representatives and the Senate are not doing that. They're doing nothing to hold him accountable. So we need to replace them with some folks who will. That's my rant for this week. We need some common good politics taking place here in the United States of America. That's going to take some of you registering to run for election next year. We need some of you to decide that you've had enough and start stepping up in your area to speak out, knowing that you're going to be public enemy number one, that Donald Trump's going to be railing against you every single day. If you will forego the campaign cash, if you will not have corporate interests at heart, if you will call a spade and say these tariffs are wrecking our economy, if you say that Donald Trump screwed the farmers, if you go out and show up for things like the No King's Day protests, he's going to consider you public enemy number one. You may not be a democratic socialist, but he's going to treat you like one. And so will all of his sycophants. But that is not who we are in this for. We are in this for the common good, for the American people. And a new movement is happening around this country, and it's going to change everything. It is probably the only hope that America has left, is that some common good politicians rise up and say, we're going to take back this broken system and we're going to do what's right for America, the beautiful, and America, the people. I hope that you will join that movement, and I hope that you'll be a part of changing everything in the United States. I'll see you again next week.